You will come through doorways that you didn't even know were there. See something unbelievable. But you have to believe it because it's right there in front of your eyes.
Back to what I said about the variety of the VHS franchise. With so many writers and directors all vying for our attention, it's a little hard not to get whiplash going from one style to the next so rapidly. And to make an example of this, I thought after this cavalcade of madness that was The Subject, Safe Haven, Ozzy's Dungeon, and To Hell and Back, this next short may seem a little quaint. TAPE49 is the wraparound segment of VHS 2, which, depending on who you ask, is the last good VHS movie. Creative control was still held by Bloody Disgusting, and coming off the smash hit that was VHS, they figured the best thing they could do was up everything to 11 and just not tell the guy that wrote the framing narrative. VHS 2 since the transition from analog to digital, with shorts like Safe Haven, A Ride in the Park, and Phase 1 Clinical Trials. All shorts that had to be shot on digital cameras, still being presented as analog videotapes. And while the first VHS felt pretty real, because even if the things pictured were all fantastic, they were still very small and intimate moments that could very easily be gone by the rest of the world. Sort of like modern myths that just happened to be caught on tape. Things that it makes sense for no one to have ever heard of. VHS 2, on the other hand, does away with that entirely. We have zombie apocalypses, the rise of the Antichrist, what else? Oh yeah, well-funded corporate projects that happens to catch actual evidence of life after death. You know, these are things that would not be easily dismissed or just forgotten about. These are things that we would have heard of in any kind of sensible reality, and yet we're supposed to have not. This is the direction that Shudder eventually took the franchise, and by all accounts did very well with. But as for tape 49, all of this blends together about as well as cold milk and hot butter. I've been baking. The dark belies the heat of the night, for his breath do not fog the car. A single glass eye follows a large man and small woman. A ring-clad finger fondles silicone breasts, and all the while the camera rolls, veiled as if the world hungers for this man's life. But then some busybody has to intrude. Lady, is he interrupting your job? Never let it be said that VHS objectifies women more than men. But let it also be said that was Simon Barrett, frequent collaborator on the VHS franchise with nearly half a dozen different segments to his name, including TAPE49. And if you believe that he cast himself as the John just so he could bang Mindy Robinson, I say duh. Not that he paints himself as a good guy. It turns out Larry Deliring is a private investigator, played by Lawrence Levine. The guy's wife hired him to find proof her husband was cheating, and so he did. But this is VHS, and we can't have good guys be our main characters.
The problem is, if I show it to her, she stops paying me. So I was thinking you might want to make a counteroffer there.
Blackmailing the philanderer, because when everyone's a carnivore, we're all vegetarians. Seriously though, stones in glass houses. For a bit of an odd job, Larry and his assistant have been hired to track down a college kid that hasn't been seen for about a week. And with the promise of $1,000 a day, they'll be happy to drag their heels on this one. They actually need to find the kid first though. A proper investigator might have smelled some day-old haddock when the concerned mother suggests they break into the kid's house because she didn't have the key. Not to say they don't pick up on any signals.
Is there someone in there? It sure as fuck sounded like there's something there.
It's an old house. Besides, if there is somebody in there, I'm gonna want to talk to him.
Okay, so you live on the wrong side of Hollywood, but you don't recognize the sound of gunfire, don't recognize it must have come from hundreds of meters away to be that subdued, and you're breaking into what seems like baby's first bando, and you're not strapped. There's establishing you are morally ambiguous, and then there's establishing you're just fucking stupid! The first room holds nothing of value beyond torn wallpaper and discarded odds and ends. But the living room is different. The small space radiates with the blaring white noise of 3/4 of a dozen CRT televisions, stacked like a lazy wall on top of one another. For all the world, the house has the feel and decor of a drug den, but the most mind-altering substance in sight would be the leaded glass of the TV screens, and the closest sight of human life, the pictures on the mantle. And yes, that is the same old man that was turned into a zombie in the first VHS movie. Simon, did no one tell you how far removed the sequel was going to be from the first movie? A small dark spot finally grabs Larry's attention. He doesn't tell Aisha about the blood spatter, but does make sure she has her gun before he leaves to make sure there is no one else here. Aisha, meanwhile, goes over the computer to find a clue to where the kid may have vanished.
I found a new one. It's third or fourth generation from the quality. I got it from some guy down in Little Armenia.
Played by L.C. Holt, and this, I think, is where the short gets really interesting. The kid slurs and drags out his speech as if struggling to think, but speaks clearly and rationally. Not as if he's high, but as if he's tired, like he hasn't slept in days. The video is something like a blog or report, talking nondescript about uncovering a VHS videotape of all things. He doesn't say what's on it, but from the way he speaks of it, Aisha learns he collects and traffics some very special material. Things that don't get distributed or mass-produced, but has to be happened across or bought by a guy who knows a guy. Things that civilized society turn away from and cast into oblivion, hoping for it never to be found.
Most of his collection, I would say, was snuff and CP, but he had at least one that was the real thing. I don't even think he knew what it was.
So of course she watches it. Don't worry, it's just phase 1. At his end of the investigation, Larry was distracted by the kid's journal, which, having apparently read it for 20 minutes, told him absolutely nothing. Discuss amongst yourselves how much sense that makes. What's obvious is whatever the kid got involved with, clearly there is no answer to be found on the tapes.
Why don't you, keep looking at these tapes? Kid's a collector. I don't know, who knows, maybe there's something else.
Oh.
I love that Kelsey Abbott is clearly thinking, the fuck kind of sense does that make? I mean, even if the tapes did have something to do with the kid going missing, there wouldn't be anything on the tapes that would show where he went. You'd look for the people he bought from and sold to. I mean, you don't ask the cocaine how the CIA is doing, are you? Time flies when you scour a dead-end home. Nigh 15 minutes later, Larry checks in on Aisha and finds her stock still, deaf to his presence, mindlessly staring into the white blizzard of screaming cathode rays.
Sorry. I must have fallen asleep. Oh, God.
That's not because she watched a ride in the park. That's just what watching an old phosphor screen does to you. And on that note, anyone who complains about blue light from a modern LCD screen hurting their eyes after staring at it for 6 hours a day, you do not know the suffering induced by sitting down to watch an 1.5 hour kids film on an old CRT TV. That's why I'm so sensitive to headaches these days. It's not that they're particularly severe, they just flash me back to the most painful moment of my life. I wouldn't exaggerate to make a satirical point, the evidence lies before you. A brief 30 minutes and Larry comes back to find Aisha as a corpse. Immediately he drops all his other concerns and runs to her. Her hand clutches a handgun. The bullet hole drools from her temple. In a rare moment of panicked desperation at the loss of all he cared for, Larry cries for help, but no one comes. Why would she possibly do this he can't begin to think of. But he may not have to. In crude, gelatinous blood, someone scribbled on a videotape, "Watch." I get it. Some minds are just too sensitive to watch slumber party alien abduction. How did this happen? No matter the choices, he has to act now. What should he do? Call the police? Paramedics? Should he move the body somewhere, or should he watch the video that wasn't there before?
I know a lot of you know my mother, and I just wanted to make sure that you guys know that she supports my decision.
It's very difficult to write this because I have no idea what motivates this man to just sit there and watch increasingly messed up videos instead of getting his co-worker, friend and possibly girlfriend out of there. Unless someone did tell Barrett what they were gonna do with the sequel and he just couldn't be fucked to write something that made sense.
It's time for me to make a tape for myself.
You can't make a VHS movie and not include a rapid twist of the knife where revelation brings damnation. The conclusion where all the facts are laid forth and the ones still living face their certain doom. When all the exits are closed and the only option left is death.
Thanks for watching.
Can I leave now? Of course not. Because Barely has the body settled before it rises back up with the least convincing facial gore I've ever seen. It looks great in brief glimpses, but you get more than 1 second to actually study the thing. You immediately notice that it's clearly just makeup hanging off his actual chin. I mean, things like the split jaw and the lolling tongue, they're all fantastic, and it's nice, gooey, very good blood, but yeah, unless the bullet elongated his face by like 2 inches, yeah, you can tell that's makeup. Although, to be fair, considering the gun going off was so subdued it sounded like it was hundreds of meters away to the 2 hens outside, maybe it can do a lot of things. Never mind that. Aisha is back. But sometimes the ground is sour. Why, oh why is it always zombies? Answering the question once and for all how much Larry really cared about her, he snaps her neck like a bottle cap. Not that it matters because this is a zombie curse, not a zombie infection. We're getting Reagan up in here. And so Larry rests, safe and secure, alone in the house of videodramatic death. Or not. What matters is, you can't kill indie filmmaking. And that was TAPE49. Yeah, it's quaint. Looking back at what came before is an interesting thing, because it forces you to ask just how good something was. I was never a big fan of VHS and didn't think too much about the sense of the wraparound since it was effectively a commercial break between other, widely disconnected stories. The entire presentation was a mess for me, and I couldn't really decide if the film was good or bad when it was pulled in so many directions. Therefore, I think I never noticed the many issues with this short. It starts really well, with the morally ambiguous setup giving us enough to know these characters deserve to die, but maybe not want to see them dead. I like the fact that the very least tried to feel like a VHS tape, no matter how little sense it made. I got a nostalgic feel for that grainy magnetic strip feel, and being written by the same person as the first, we got that gritty, believable feel of the first. Most of all, I love the hint of lore it creates for the franchise. It wasn't just an old guy, there is a network of collectors for these isolated moments of palpable evil. And there's more to them than simple depravity, they have a genuine influence on their wistful audience. Are they collected for religious purposes? Is it a form of mania? Can different experiences amount to different effects? There's so much this hints at I would have loved to see explored in sequels more along the lines of these two first films. But before anything all that significant could be done with it, they upped it to 11, removed the imagination and said, yeah, the tapes are alive and want to plummet the world into chaos, which leaves all great things it hinted at unexplored. And the longer it goes on, the less sense it makes. And soon as Aisha started watching the tapes, nothing all that interesting came of it. Not to say tape 56 had me by the edge of my seat, but at least it threw new characters at me that talked and interacted and just gave me something to focus on other than the empty, silent room and tight-lipped actors. And then there is the ending, which had that awful taste of dull and stupid that just makes for a bad film. Everything from the focus on the plastic face to the bug-like tittering of Aisha's knees on the floor just felt dumb and unsatisfying after all the other shorts the movie threw at us. Tape 49 is bad in the worst way, and I am glad I decided to cut out all the shorts, because if I hadn't, I probably wouldn't have noticed.